In this video, I will show you how I removed this broken fence post and installed a new one in the same hole with simple gardening tools. Along the way, I will discuss 10 common mistakes to avoid when doing this on a budget. The first thing to do is to buy the new 4x4 fence post. There are mainly two reasons for that. First, since we are on a budget, cedar wood is not an option. Pressure-treated lumber is more affordable while offering pretty good resistance to decay. This leads us to mistake number 1, not properly drying the new post. Pressure-treated wood at a big box store often still has a high level of humidity, so it is necessary to dry it before installation. This can require a few days to a few weeks, depending on weather conditions. I like to select my 4x4 post as straight as possible, but as the wood dries, some warping will inevitably appear, especially with the cheap lumber sold nowadays. So it is important to dry the post on a flat area and monitor the drying process to control curvature by applying pressure with some weight, like a heavy dumbbell. Let's move on to mistake number 2, getting a new post that is too short. In cold climates like Canada, it is not uncommon to bury close to 4 feet of the post to avoid movement due to cycles of soil expansion and contraction caused by frost. For a 6-foot tall fence, the post should therefore be at least 10 feet long. Keep in mind that a 10-foot post can fit in a minivan or even a sedan car, but not in a hatchback. I learned mistake number 3 the hard way, not inspecting for structural defects. Not only can a longer post induce a more pronounced warping during drying, it is also less tolerant to mechanical stress. As a matter of fact, my fence post here snapped only after 3 years. Not because of decay, but because of a structural defect, maybe due to handling at the store. So make sure to always inspect your lumber, especially around the midsection, before making the purchase. I'm not talking about small nips here and there, but about non-natural cracks that compromise the integrity of the post, for example. Why did I not notice the damage before buying this post 3 years ago? Well,
somewhere along the way I lost a step. I got sloppy, dulled my own edge. Maybe I went and did the worst crime of all. I got civilized. So now, we zero the clock.
Yeah, what follows is going to be pretty uncivilized and low-tech. And besides drying time, the second reason the first thing to do is buying the fence post is because it starts the clock. Replacing a fence post can be a tough job. I'd rather plant 10-foot trees than replace a fence post. You know it's going to be you against the fence post, not like the easy work shown on so many YouTube videos by some professionals with access to specialized equipment, or some new fence installation, or a job done in a field in the middle of nowhere where you can just use a truck to rip the old post out without fear of damaging the surroundings. Winter is coming. The post needs to be changed. You need to stop procrastinating. Since you are on a budget, forking some hard-earned cash to buy a fence post instead of eating out can be the extra motivation to get the ball rolling. Well, at least that works for me. The hardest part of the job is to remove the old post. Did you know that the cost of removing an old post by a contractor can be equal to the cost of installing a new one? Actually, depending on the situation, the cost can even be higher. To make the job easier, keep in mind mistake number 4, not checking the weather. For a manual job, timing is key. I usually wait for 2 sunny days after a rain to allow more time for the water to drain. This is especially important in clay soil, as with extra humidity, water can slowly accumulate at the bottom of the hole, which makes the clay very sticky and renders the job of removing the old post that much harder. The best time to do it, in my opinion, is during summertime. But the flip side is that digging a hole under a scorching sun is no good. It's bad. So overcast days are the best. Early morning and late afternoon are also preferred. Talking about digging a hole, next mistake on the list is often done by people who have never digged up a fence post. Mistake number 5. Digging a small hole centered around the post. A small hole makes it very difficult to dig deep. Even with a specialized manual hole digger, the larger the hole, the easier it will be to dig deep. Also, avoid digging the hole with the post in the middle. This is obvious here because of the constraint imposed by the building foundation. But if the building was not there, having the post close to the edge of the hole allows easier leverage against the edge to yank the post down to the opposite side before pulling it out. If there is some pavement around, mistake number 6 will add some extra cost and effort, not separating the dirt. After removing the paving stones, I first collect the top layer of dirt in plastic bags. Expect to find a foot or more of rock dust or crushed stones below paving stones or other pavement materials. This top layer should be reused right under the pavement for stability. Bags of rock dust and crushed stones have gone up in price like everything else, but they have not yet been affected by shrinkflation and still weigh the same 60 pounds or 30 kilograms here in North America. So spare yourself the extra effort of buying bags from the home improvement store and reuse what was already there. After collecting the top layer, the real digging begins. In an urban or suburban setting, close to a building, it is not uncommon to find roots and construction materials like bricks buried around. Getting rid of those as you dig deeper becomes gradually more difficult. I prefer using a spade with a narrow head to dig and switching to a short shovel with a larger head, like a snow shovel, to remove the dirt. Below 3 feet, a garden hoe is easier to use to remove large chunks of compacted clay if you do not have a manual hole digger. But hey, we are on a budget, right? The digging was actually fairly straightforward. Dislodging the post and lifting it out of the hole was almost effortless. There were 2 reasons for that. First, as already mentioned, I replaced this post 3 years ago. The digging was more difficult the first time around, with larger roots to cut through. Second, I used expanding foam instead of concrete to anchor the post. Expanding foam is much lighter than concrete, making the lifting feel like a breeze. Lifting 3 to 4 feet of concrete out of a deep hole without causing a back injury requires a strong grip, a good technique, and a pretty good deadlift personal record. A better option is to break the concrete block into smaller and more manageable pieces with a maul. This is another reason for digging a larger hole, as it allows more room and angles to swing the maul to break up the concrete block. An even better option, in my opinion, is to use expanding foam. It is much less bulky to carry around, much lighter weight, takes much less time to cure, and can be applied even in cold temperatures. Expanding foam can also be easily shaped. More on this later. When comes the time to replace a fence post, you will be glad to see that it was anchored with expanding foam. With regard to performance, as already mentioned, I had to replace my fence post because of an unseen structural defect when I bought the post. I sometimes forgot to close my fence door and it would regularly slam into the post in strong wind. After 3 years of beating, the post eventually broke at its weakest point above the ground, at the precise location of the structural defect. Despite the regular beating, the formed underground portion of the post never gave in and remained straight up. But expanding foam is more expensive than concrete, something to keep in mind if you want to minimize your budget. Also, in loose soil, like sandy soil, I would probably stick with concrete. That being said, I did notice that the post would sometimes slightly rise in winter, which made locking the fence door more difficult. So I decided to take a closer look at the broken post. Its length was clearly much less than 4 feet. Maybe I thought that since the post was next to my heated garage, I could get away with a shorter underground section. How could I have done such a sloppy job? This time I was going to dig 4 feet deep. Which brings me to mistake number 7, underestimating the effort. I soon realized why I did not go deeper the first time around. There was a massive root at the bottom which made further progress impossible. While the digging had been pretty straightforward up until that point, removing this root at more than 3 feet deep was going to be the crux of this task. Watching YouTube videos where people install 1 mile of fence in less than 5 minutes with no digging could give you a false impression of ease. It took me the rest of the day to remove the root and dig down to 4 feet. So just in case, plan for 2 days of work, as the worst case scenario might be the one Murphy's Law has in store for you. And make sure the 2 days are not rainy days. Trust me, you do not want to be dealing with wet clay soil while digging at 4 feet deep. After all this hard work, it can be easy to make mistake number 8, having the wrong stuff at the bottom of the hole. I have seen many sources recommending having a layer of crushed stones at the bottom of the hole to avoid water accumulation and rotting of the post from the bottom. I have digged up decade-old fence posts set in concrete and foam, with no layer of crushed stone at the bottom of the hole, and none of them were rotten at the bottom end. A case in point, after 3 years in the ground, my broken post had zero sign of rotting. In fact, having a layer of crushed stones might actually increase the likelihood of water accumulation. On a side note, any good gardener knows that having a layer of gravel at the bottom of a pot can lead to root rot, and actually does more harm than good to a plant. So to me this is a myth, but if you are dead set on having a layer of crushed stones at the bottom of the hole, you should avoid cutting a pressure-treated post. If cutting is necessary to adjust the length of the post, never have the cut section in the ground. Best practice is to cut the fence post to length only after installation is complete. Also, keep in mind that using liquid expanding foam with a layer of crushed stones at the bottom can lead to some leakage of the product below the post before it cures. Leakage increases the likelihood that the foam will cave in, like here, under the pressure of compacted soil over time. Finally, the bottom of the hole should not have any water in it if expanding foam is to be used. Water can alter the properties of the product, like adherence. So again, don't forget to check the weather forecast before digging. With a large hole, pouring concrete or liquid foam directly into the hole does not make economic sense. I first bury a 4-foot long building tube and make sure to avoid mistake number 9, having the tube flush with ground level. The tube should protrude above the ground to allow for a footing that will protect the post from rotting at surface level. While wooden fence posts almost never rot from the bottom up, they do fail most of the time at the bases due to water accumulation there. In my opinion, it is okay if the buried foam section of a 10-foot post is a little bit shorter than 4 feet to allow for a few extra inches of protection above the ground. I like to use an old short 4x4 post to compact the clay around the tube, regularly checking that it remains perfectly level as I backfill the hole. Covering the top end of the tube prevents dirt and debris from accidentally falling into the tube during the shoveling. What falls into the tube is virtually impossible to remove at 4 feet deep. Now it is time to set the new post in the tube. I am using expanding foam here. This product solidifies very quickly, so the margin for error is thin. Make sure you have everything properly set up before mixing the product. And don't forget to have a pair of scissors close by. A helper is not required, but makes the task of keeping the post leveled easier while I monitor the expansion of the foam. Why monitor the expansion? Because I want to make sure the foam reaches the top of the tube. This brings us to mistake number 10, not provisioning for enough filling materials. In my experience with a 4-foot long 6-inch tube, sometimes the foam reaches the top, sometimes it does not. So do not disregard the directions on the bag, but at the same time, do not blindly trust them either. For example, the tube may not be exactly 6 inches wide, or there could be some leakage at the bottom of the tube. The big box stores I went to no longer had 6-inch tubes, only 8-inch tubes were left. After pouring the first bag of expanding foam, it quickly became clear that it was not going to be enough to get to the top of the tube. I had to use a second bag. So I suggest you get 2 bags instead of 1. If the second bag is not required, just shelve it for your next project. Unopened bags of expanding foam can be stored for a pretty long time, unlike bags of concrete that can quickly be ruined if exposed to damp or high humidity conditions during storage. As a matter of fact, one of the 2 bags I used for this project was purchased more than a year before. One downside to using expanding foam is that it is difficult to avoid wasting some materials, but I decided I was not going to do a sloppy job this time around. Better have too much than not enough. Even on a budget, I'd rather spend more than having to do this again. The foam sticks very well to the wooden post. Notice how water does not seep between the foam and the post. Also, I found that the foam is pretty good at sealing the cracks that appeared when the post was left to dry. No need to add any screws to the post for stronger bondage as some people do with concrete. Screws can be dangerous to deal with when removing an old post if you have to break up the concrete before lifting the post out of the hole. Also, once dry, expanding foam is easily cut into the desired shape with a variety of tools. I like to use a long hand saw, but other cutting tools can do the job. An electric oscillating tool makes cutting the cardboard tube easier and is great for some fine work, but is not essential. Cutting the foam can reveal air pockets, which is another downside of expanding foam. Just to be safe, I had an open tube of all-weather sealant and I used it to seal the hole. This is what the post and the foam footing will look like after some time. Thank you for watching and good luck with your project!